The wind howled like a wounded beast across the Dakota plains, driving snow sideways in sheets so thick that Clara Whitmore could barely see her own gloved hand stretched before her face. The year was 1882, and she had been traveling for 3 days from Chicago, her trunk of books and teaching supplies secured in the back of the wagon that had long since become stuck in a drift somewhere behind her. She stumbled forward, her wool coat already crusted with ice, her boots filling with snow. The driver had abandoned her hours ago, fleeing back toward the last town they'd passed, promising to return with help. Clara knew better than to wait. In weather like this, waiting meant death. Her fingers, numb despite her leather gloves, clutched the worn leather satchel that held her most precious possessions, letters of recommendation, a silver pen gifted by her students back east, and the contract for her position at the new schoolhouse in Willow Creek. If she could only find it. If she could only survive. The cold was unlike anything she'd known in Philadelphia. It bit through her clothing, seized her lungs, made her limbs heavy as lead. She'd read about men who simply lay down in the snow and never rose again, and now she understood the terrible temptation. Just to rest. Just for a moment. That's when she saw it. A flicker of light through the white chaos. Not the town she'd hoped for, but a single window glowing amber in the storm. She forced her frozen legs to move faster, stumbling, falling, crawling when she had to. The light grew larger, became a cabin, solid and real against the fury of the storm. Clara pounded on the heavy wooden door with what little strength remained in her arms. "Please!" Her voice was barely a whisper against the wind. "Help me, please!" The door swung open, and Clara found herself looking up and up at the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, his face weathered and hard as the mountains. Dark hair hung past his collar, and his eyes were the color of winter steel. For a moment, she wondered if she'd traded one death for another. Without a word, he reached down and lifted her as easily as a child, carrying her into the blessed warmth of the cabin. He kicked the door shut behind them and set her on her feet near the stone fireplace. Clara's legs immediately gave way, and she would have fallen if his massive hands hadn't steadied her. Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. The giant moved with surprising grace for his size, pulling a wooden chair close to the fire. "Sit," he commanded, his voice deep as thunder. While Clara struggled to remove her frozen gloves, he disappeared into another room, returning with thick wool blankets and a steaming mug. "Drink." He pressed the mug into her hands. Coffee, black and strong, with something else that burned pleasantly down her throat. Whiskey. She realized. Her mother would have been scandalized, as feeling slowly returned to her extremities, bringing with it 1,000 needles of pain. Clara took in her surroundings. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, built with careful craftsmanship. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, the floors swept clean. Books lined one wall. Shakespeare, the Bible, even some volumes of poetry. Not what she'd expected from a frontier dwelling. "You're the new school teacher." It wasn't a question. The giant had settled into a chair across from her, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "Heard tell you were coming. Didn't expect you'd be fool enough to travel in this weather." Clara bristled despite her gratitude. "The weather was clear when we started this morning. The storm came from nowhere." "Storms always come from somewhere, ma'am. Just because Eastern folk can't read the signs doesn't mean they weren't there." He stood, moving to the window where the snow still raged. "This one's fixing to last 3 days, maybe 4. 3 days?" Clara's heart sank. "But I'm expected in Willow Creek. The school board. The school board can wait. You won't do those children any good frozen solid on the prairie." He turned back to her, and she saw something flicker across his harsh features. Amusement, perhaps. "Name's Gideon Cole. Clara Whitmore." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "Mr. Cole, I'm grateful for your hospitality, but surely when the storm lessens, look around you, Miss Whitmore." His gesture encompassed the small cabin. "This is it. 1 room for living, 1 for sleeping. No hotel, no boarding house, no neighbor for 10 miles in any direction. You'll shelter here until the storm passes, and then I'll see you safe to town." The implications of his words settled over Clara like another kind of cold. A young, unmarried woman, alone with a strange man for days. Her reputation would be in tatters before she even began teaching. "I couldn't possibly—" Gideon crossed his arms over his massive chest, studying her with those penetrating eyes. Then he spoke the words that would change everything. "You'll warm my bed tonight, and I'll build you a ranch tomorrow." Clara's mouth fell open. The coffee mug nearly slipped from her fingers. "I beg your pardon." For the first time, she saw him truly smile, a wry twist of his lips that transformed his face. "Not what you're thinking. Schoolteacher, look at you, half frozen, exhausted, about ready to collapse. And look at this place, one bed, one man who's survived 40 winters on these plains. You stay in that chair all night. You'll catch your death regardless of the fire. We share the bed for warmth. Nothing more. And come spring, if you decide this land suits you better than whatever life you left behind, I'll build you a proper house. Maybe you'll even want to stay and teach more than just children their letters." Clara stared at him, this giant of a man who spoke so boldly, yet somehow without crude intent. There was a loneliness in his eyes that matched something in her own heart. The loneliness of choosing a hard path, of leaving safety behind for something uncertain. "Mr. Cole, you don't know anything about me. I know you came out here alone. Know you're running from something or towards something, maybe both. Know you've got steel in your spine, or you'd have given up in that storm." He moved to the stove, refilling her mug. "No, I've been alone on this land for 5 years, building something worth having but with no one worth having it for." The wind rattled the windows, reminding Clara of the alternative to this scandalous proposition. Death waited outside, patient and cold. Inside was warmth, survival, and a choice that would define her future in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "I'm not the kind of woman you think I am," she said quietly. "Good. I'm not the kind of man most think I am either." Gideon pulled a clean nightshirt from a trunk, one of his own that would dwarf her small frame. "You can change in the bedroom. There's water for washing. Take your time deciding, Miss Whitmore. But decide you must. That storm won't wait for propriety." Clara stood on shaking legs, clutching the nightshirt and her satchel. At the bedroom door, she paused. "Why would you offer to build a ranch for someone you've just met?" Gideon was banking the fire, his broad back to her. "Because I recognize someone else who's betting everything on a new life. And because a man who's found his land needs a reason to make it more than just a place to survive." As Clara closed the bedroom door behind her, she realized she stood at a crossroads far more significant than any geographic journey. Behind her lay the safe, suffocating life she'd fled. The marriage proposal from a wealthy merchant, the tea parties and social calls, the slow death of her spirit. Ahead lay scandal, uncertainty, and a giant of a man who spoke of building futures with the same casual confidence with which he'd lifted her from the storm. She changed slowly, her fingers still clumsy with cold, and made her choice. Sometimes survival meant more than just keeping your body alive. Sometimes it meant taking the chance that would let your soul survive too. When she emerged, wrapped in his nightshirt and her blankets, Gideon had already prepared the bed with additional covers. He stood beside it, still fully clothed. "I'll sleep in the chair," he offered, though she could see he expected her refusal. "No." Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. "You were right. This is about survival, nothing more. We'll share the bed, Mr. Cole. And come morning, we'll see what comes next." As they settled on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to touch, the storm raged on outside. But inside the cabin, there was warmth, the crackle of the fire, and the strange comfort of another human presence. Clara closed her eyes and thought of the students waiting for her in Willow Creek, of the new life she'd risked everything to claim. She didn't yet know that the man beside her would become her whole world, that his promise of a ranch was really a promise of partnership, of love, of a future neither of them could have imagined. All she knew was that she'd made her choice. To survive, to trust, and to see what tomorrow would bring when the storm finally cleared. Clara woke to the sound of wood being split outside, each crack echoing across the frozen landscape. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until the unfamiliar weight of heavy quilts and the scent of wood smoke brought everything rushing back. She was in Gideon Cole's bed, alone now, though the warmth on the other side told her he hadn't been gone long. Daylight filtered through frost-covered windows, revealing the storm still raging, though with less fury than the night before. Clara rose carefully, her body aching from yesterday's ordeal, and wrapped herself in a blanket before padding to the window. Gideon stood in the swirling snow, splitting logs with an ease that spoke of years of practice. Despite the cold, he wore only a wool shirt and pants, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Each swing of the axe was precise, economical. Clara found herself studying the rhythm of his movements, the way he made such hard labor look effortless. She turned from the window to examine the cabin more closely in daylight. Her teacher's eye catalogued everything. The books she'd noticed last night were well read, spines cracked from use. A Bible sat alongside volumes of Thoreau, Emerson, and yes, Shakespeare's complete works. On another shelf, she found journals filled with a careful hand documenting weather patterns, crop yields, and livestock notes. The kitchen area was sparse but clean, with dishes already washed and drying by the stove. Clara touched the coffee pot, still warm. He'd made breakfast and cleaned up without waking her. Such consideration from a man who looked like he could wrestle a bear. Her leather satchel sat on the table where she'd left it. Clara opened it carefully, checking her precious contents. The letters of recommendation were damp but legible. Her silver pen, a farewell gift from her students at the Philadelphia Academy for Young Ladies, gleamed in its case. And there, wrapped in oilcloth, was the photograph she'd carried across half a continent, herself with her class. 20 bright faces whose parents had been scandalized when she'd announced her intention to teach in the territories. "You left a comfortable life." Clara startled, not having heard Gideon enter. He stood by the door, arms full of split wood, snow dusting his dark hair. Comfortable isn't always fulfilling. "Mr. Cole." She closed the satchel carefully. Those girls were being prepared for lives of ornamental uselessness. I wanted to teach children who truly needed education. He stacked the wood by the fireplace, movements deliberate and neat. Most Eastern ladies wouldn't see it that way. They'd consider this, he gestured to the simple cabin, a step down in the world. Then most Eastern ladies are fools. The words came out sharper than she intended. Clara softened her tone. "I'm sorry. It's just, I received 3 marriage proposals last year. Each man saw me as an acquisition, a pretty thing to manage his household and host his dinners. None of them understood why I'd want to keep teaching after marriage." Gideon poured fresh coffee, setting a mug before her along with a plate of biscuits and preserves. "My mother was a teacher," he said quietly. "Back in Ohio, before we came west, she taught me and my brothers our letters, made sure we could read and cipher, said education was the only thing no one could take from you. She sounds like a wise woman. She was." The past tense hung heavy between them. Gideon settled into the chair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem child-sized. "Died of fever when I was 15. Pa followed her within the year, broken heart, the doctor said, though I suspect it was more like broken will." Clara spread preserves on a biscuit, choosing her words carefully. "Is that when you came west?" "Eventually. War came first." His expression darkened. "Spent 4 years seeing things no man should see. When it ended, couldn't stomach going back to Ohio. Too many ghosts. Drifted for a while. Then found this place." She noticed he didn't specify which side he'd fought for, and she didn't ask. The war had ended 17 years ago, but its wounds still ran deep. "You've built something good here. Built it alone." He stood abruptly, moving to tend the fire. "That's not a complaint. Mind you, just a fact. Man chooses isolation. He can't blame anyone but himself for the consequences." Clara watched him work, noting the careful way he arranged the logs, the practiced efficiency of every movement. This was a man who'd learned to rely only on himself, to need no one. Yet he'd opened his door to her, shared his bed for warmth, made her breakfast without expectation of thanks. "May I ask you something, Mr. Cole?" He glanced back. Gideon, man who shares his bed with a woman, even for survival, ought to be on first-name basis. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she pressed on. "Gideon, then why did you really make that offer last night about building a ranch?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Ever watch a river, Clara, way it carves through rock, patient and persistent, until it's made a channel so deep nothing can change its course?" She nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "That's what loneliness does to a man. Carves him out hollow, year after year, until he forgets there was ever another way to be. Then something disrupts the flow. Storm washes a new stream into being, maybe, or earthquake shifts the whole landscape." He turned to face her fully. "You showed up half dead on my doorstep in the middle of the worst storm in 5 years. If that's not the universe trying to tell me something, I don't know what is. So, you proposed to a complete stranger based on cosmic disruption?" A smile tugged at his lips, the same wry expression she'd seen last night. "Didn't propose. Offered a possibility. There's a difference." Clara stood, moving to the window where the snow still fell steadily. "I need to understand something. Last night, you said I'd warm your bed. What exactly did you mean?" "What I said, nothing more, nothing less." He joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. "This land will kill you if you're alone when trouble comes. Shared body heat in winter means survival. Come spring, if you're still here, we'd build proper accommodations, 2 houses if need be, or one with separate quarters. Whatever preserves your reputation and keeps you safe." "And if I'm not still here come spring?" "Then I take you to town when the snow clears. You teach your students, and we part as friends who helped each other through a storm." Clara studied his profile. The strong jaw and weathered features that spoke of hard years and harder choices. "You're not what I expected from a frontier man. You're not what I expected from an Eastern schoolmarm." They stood together watching the snow. 2 people from different worlds brought together by chance and weather. Clara thought of the life she'd left. The restrictive corsets, the endless social calls, the suffocating expectations. Then she looked around this simple cabin with its books in careful order, at the man who read Shakespeare and spoke of loneliness like a poet. "I should help with chores," she said finally. "If I'm to impose on your hospitality for several days, I should earn my keep. You're not imposing, but if it makes you feel better, there's mending in that basket by the fire. Unless Eastern ladies don't learn such skills." Clara laughed, the first real laugh since she'd left Philadelphia. This Eastern lady learned to sew before she learned to read. "Though I warn you, my embroidery is terrible. I always preferred books to needlework. Good thing I need shirts mended, not decorated." They fell into an easy rhythm as the day progressed. Clara worked on the mending while Gideon tended to necessary tasks around the cabin. They talked as they worked. She told him about her students in Philadelphia, the satisfaction of watching young minds grasp new concepts. He shared stories of building the cabin, of learning which crops grew best in this soil, of the small herd of cattle he'd built from a single breeding pair. As evening approached and the storm showed no signs of abating, Clara helped prepare dinner. They worked side by side in the small kitchen area, her slicing vegetables while he tended the stew pot. It felt strangely natural, as if they'd done this 100 times before. "I should tell you," Clara said as they sat down to eat. "I received a letter last month from Mr. Thornberry, one of the men who proposed. He wasn't pleased when I refused him." Gideon's expression darkened. "He make threats. Veiled ones. Suggested I'd regret choosing wilderness and savages over civilization. His father has business interests out here. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to make trouble." "Let him try. There was steel in Gideon's voice. Man who can't accept a woman's no isn't much of a man at all. After dinner, they settled by the fire, Gideon with a harness that needed repair, Clara with one of his books. She'd chosen Emerson's essays, finding comfort in familiar words so far from home. You can read aloud if you like, Gideon offered. Been a long time since I heard educated voices speak those words. So Clara read, her clear voice filling the cabin while the storm raged outside. She glanced up occasionally to find him watching her, his hands still working but his attention clearly on the words. When she reached the passage about self-reliance, he smiled. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string, he quoted softly. Always liked that line. As the hour grew late, they prepared for bed with the same careful courtesy as the night before. This time, Clara felt less awkward as they settled on opposite sides of the mattress. The warmth between them was just that, warmth, necessary for survival. Nothing more. Yet she couldn't help but be aware of his presence, the steady sound of his breathing, the solid reality of another human being after months of traveling alone. Clara? His voice came quiet in the darkness. Yes? Whatever comes next, storm clearing, you going to town or staying? I'm glad you knocked on my door. She smiled into the pillow. So am I. Gideon, so am I. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, cutting them off from the world. But inside the cabin, two lonely souls had found an unexpected connection, not yet love, not yet partnership, but the beginning of understanding. And sometimes, that's how the best stories begin, with two strangers sharing warmth in a storm, learning they might not be so strange to each other after all. The third day of the storm dawned with an eerie quiet. Clara woke to find Gideon already up, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, his silhouette dark against the pale morning light. The constant howling that had become their companion had ceased, replaced by a gentle, steady snowfall. Storm's breaking, he said without turning. Another day, maybe two, and it'll be safe to travel. Clara felt an unexpected pang at his words. She rose and joined him at the window, accepting the cup he offered. Outside, the world had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, everything softened and made beautiful by the snow's heavy blanket. It's magnificent, she breathed. And deadly, he reminded her, but his voice was gentle. Beautiful things often are. They stood in comfortable silence, shoulders almost touching, watching the snow fall. Clara had grown accustomed to his presence over the past days. The way he moved through the cabin with surprising grace, how he hummed softly while working, the careful distance he maintained even while sharing close quarters. You never asked, she said suddenly, why I really left Philadelphia. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Clara set down her cup, wrapping her arms around herself. There was a scandal, not mine, my father's. He was a bank clerk, respectable, reliable, until they discovered he'd been skimming funds to pay for my mother's medicine. She had consumption, lingered for 3 years. The treatments were expensive, experimental. He loved her, Gideon said simply. He did, more than his honor, more than his reputation. When she died and the truth came out, he couldn't live with the shame. He took his own life. The words still hurt to say. I was teaching at the academy then. The board allowed me to finish the term, but made it clear my contract wouldn't be renewed. Tainted by association, they said. Gideon's jaw tightened. Hypocrites. Mr. Thornberry, one of the men who proposed. He knew all this. Said he'd be doing me a favor, giving me respectability despite my family's disgrace. He'd bring it up whenever I showed what he called unwomanly independence. Clara laughed bitterly. As if I should be grateful for his condescension. Is that when you decided to come west? That night, I saw an advertisement in the newspaper. Towns across the territories desperate for teachers. No questions about family or past. Just, can you teach? Can you survive? I wrote immediately. Gideon turned to face her fully. Takes courage to leave everything behind. Or desperation. She met his eyes. But you know about that, don't you? You've been running from something too. He stiffened slightly. then relaxed. Not running anymore. Been standing still for 5 years now. Sometimes that's harder than running. The day unfolded differently than the previous two. The lessening storm had shifted something between them, made their temporary arrangement feel more permanent. Clara found herself imagining what it would be like to stay, not just through winter, but through spring planting and summer harvest. As she mended another of his shirts, he seemed to tear them with alarming regularity. She watched him work on a piece of wood he'd been carving. His large hands moved with delicate precision, coaxing something beautiful from the raw material. "What are you making?" He held it up, a small horse, so detailed she could see the flowing mane and proud arch of its neck. "Habit from the war. Keeping my hands busy kept my mind quiet. Started making toys for local children, though there aren't many around here. It's beautiful. You could sell these in town. Not about money." He set the horse aside, picking up another piece of wood. "It's about creating something that wasn't there before, making the world a little less empty." Clara understood. It was why she taught, taking young minds and filling them with knowledge, watching understanding dawn like sunrise. "My students in Philadelphia, they collected books for me before I left. Said every frontier child deserved to read about faraway places." She smiled at the memory. "I told them frontier children might have more to teach about adventure than any book. You miss them?" "I do, but I'm excited about the children in Willow Creek, too, starting fresh, building something from nothing." She paused in her sewing. "That is, assuming I still have a position after arriving so dramatically late." "You'll have a position." Gideon's confidence was absolute. "Town's been without a teacher for 2 years. They're not going to turn away someone with your qualifications over a snowstorm." That evening, as they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become natural as breathing, Gideon surprised her by pulling out a worn fiddle case. "You play?" Clara couldn't hide her delight. Mother insisted, said music was civilizing. He tuned the instrument with practiced ease. "Haven't had an audience in years." "Please." She settled by the fire. Work forgotten. "I haven't heard music since leaving Philadelphia." He played beautifully, old hymns she recognized, folk tunes that must have come west with the settlers, and melancholy pieces that spoke of loneliness and loss. Clara found herself crying during a particularly haunting melody, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Gideon lowered the fiddle. "I didn't mean to. No, please, it's beautiful. I didn't expect beauty out here. I prepared myself for hardship and isolation, but not for Shakespeare and violin music and philosophical discussions by the fire." "Hardship and beauty aren't opposites," he said softly. "Sometimes one creates the other, like pressure creating diamonds." Clara wiped her eyes. "Is that what you are? Gideon Cole? A diamond formed under pressure? More like coal still burning." He set the fiddle aside, but maybe that's enough to keep someone warm through the winter. The conversation had ventured into dangerous territory, the kind of intimate exchange that acknowledged what was growing between them. Clara retreated to safer ground. "Play something cheerful, something you'd play at a barn raising or a wedding." His eyes met hers at the word wedding, but he complied, launching into a lively reel that had her tapping her feet. When he finished, she applauded, laughing at the impromptu concert in the middle of nowhere. "Dance with me," he said suddenly, standing and offering his hand. "Here? Now? When better? Can't scandals the neighbors. Nearest ones are 10 miles off." Clara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. It disappeared in his massive grip, but his touch was gentle as he led her in a simple country dance. He hummed the tune, his deep voice resonating through his chest where her hand rested. They moved carefully around the small space, avoiding furniture and each other's feet. "You're a good dancer," she said, surprised. Mother again. Said no son of hers would be a social embarrassment. He spun her slowly. "Course, there's not much call for dancing when you live alone on the prairie. Maybe that will change." They stopped moving but didn't separate. Clara looked up at him, seeing past the intimidating size to the lonely man who read poetry, and made toy horses and played violin in an empty cabin. He was looking at her too, and she wondered what he saw. The disgraced teacher running from scandal, or something more. "Clara," he began, then stopped. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds, I should check on the livestock. Would you come with me? I could show you the land, the valley where—" He caught himself. "Where I graze the cattle in summer." She heard what he didn't say. Where he'd build a ranch. If she stayed, I'd like that. They separated then, the moment too charged to sustain. As they prepared for bed, Clara felt the shift in their dynamic. 3 nights of sharing a bed for warmth had created an intimacy that went beyond the physical. She knew his breathing patterns, the way he muttered sometimes in dreams, how he always woke before dawn but lay still to avoid disturbing her. "Gideon," she said into the darkness after they'd settled. Tell me about the land, the ranch you envision." He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then, there's a valley 1/2 a mile north, protected from the worst winds, with a stream that never runs dry. Good soil for gardens, grass for grazing. I've thought about building there, proper house with real rooms, barn for horses, maybe even a school." His voice grew softer. "Always seemed foolish, planning all that for one man, but with someone else, it sounds wonderful." Clara whispered. "Could be, with the right partner. Partner, not wife, not woman, partner. Someone to build alongside, not for—" Clara closed her eyes, imagining it, teaching children in the morning, helping with ranch work in the afternoon, evenings by the fire with books and music and companionship. "The storm's ending," she said unnecessarily. "Yes, things will change when it does. They always do." His hand found hers across the space between them, a brief squeeze of understanding. "But some changes are worth the risk." Clara held onto his hand for a moment longer before letting go. Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, no longer a threat but a blessing, giving them one more day in this suspended reality where a giant cowboy who quoted Emerson and a runaway teacher could imagine a future together. Tomorrow they would venture out, and she would see the land he loved. The day after, perhaps, they would travel to town where she would become the school teacher and he would return to his solitary cabin. Unless she chose to see the ranch not as a proposition but as a possibility. Unless she decided that beauty could indeed grow from hardship, that 2 damaged souls might create something whole. Unless she was brave enough to admit that in 3 days of snowbound isolation, she'd found more genuine companionship than in 25 years of proper society. The choice would come with the morning, but tonight, in the warmth and safety of a cabin that had become a haven, Clara allowed herself to dream of staying. Spring came to the Dakota Territory like a cautious visitor, testing the ground with tentative warmth before committing to stay. Clara stood on the ridge overlooking Gideon's Valley, her hand shading her eyes against the brilliant sun. The snow had retreated to the shadows, revealing the land in all its raw beauty, rolling grassland that would soon turn green, the silver ribbon of the creek, and the sheltered spot where Gideon envisioned building. "It's perfect," she breathed, beside her. Gideon sat easy in his saddle, watching her reaction. They'd ridden out early, Clara on the gentle mare he'd produced from the small stable she hadn't even known existed. 3 months had passed since the storm brought her to his door. 3 months of a strange dance, she teaching in town during the week, returning to the cabin on weekends, maintaining propriety while building something deeper than mere attraction. "That flat area by the creek," he pointed. "That's where the house would go. Face it east to catch morning sun, build the barn to block the worst of the winter wind." Clara could see it clearly, a real house with windows full of light. Children playing in the yard, a garden heavy with vegetables. The vision hit her with unexpected force. And the school. There, on that rise, central to the valley but high enough to stay dry during spring floods. The Hartwells have 4 children, the Millers 3. More families are coming. He turned to her, his expression serious. "They're coming because of you. Clara, Word spread about the teacher who makes learning an adventure. It was true. Her small schoolhouse in Willow Creek had gone from 8 students to 20 in 3 months. Parents who'd never considered education important were bringing their children from miles away. She'd started teaching adults in the evenings, men who'd never learned to read, women hungry for knowledge beyond household skills. Mr. Hartwell came by yesterday, Clara said, still gazing at the valley. Said they're thinking of relocating closer to town. His wife wants the children to have proper schooling year-round. Sam Hartwell's a good man. He and Martha would be fine neighbors. The unspoken hung between them. Neighbors to whom? To Gideon alone, or to both of them? Since that first week, he hadn't renewed his bold proposition, hadn't pressed for anything beyond friendship. But Clara felt the weight of possibility in every shared meal, every evening of reading by the fire, every Sunday ride to see the progress of spring. We should head to the Hartwell place, Gideon said finally. Martha's expecting us for noon dinner. The Hartwell homestead bustled with life, children running between outbuildings, chickens scratching in the yard, laundry snapping on the line. Martha Hartwell emerged from the house, flower in her hair and a warm smile on her face. Clara, Gideon, perfect timing. I just pulled bread from the oven. Inside, the house hummed with controlled chaos. 4 children ranging from 5 to 12 years old tried to present their best manners while clearly bursting with energy. Clara had taught them all. Little Sarah, who devoured every book she could find. Thomas, who struggled with letters but could calculate figures in his head. The twins, Mary and James, who competed fiercely in everything, including their studies. Miss Whitmore. Sarah tugged at her skirt. Did you bring the new book? Clara produced Alice's Adventures in Wonderland from her satchel, delighting the children. We'll read a chapter after dinner if your mother approves. Bless you, Martha said, setting a loaded table. They talk of nothing but your lessons. Thomas has been practicing his letters every evening. Over dinner, conversation flowed easily. Sam Hartwell, a solid man with farmer's hands and keen eyes, discussed plans for expanding his holdings. More families coming this summer. Peterson from Illinois. Brought his whole clan. Miller's cousin from Ohio. This valley's going to fill up fast. Going to need that school, Martha added, glancing meaningfully between Clara and Gideon. A proper school, not just the church basement, somewhere a teacher could settle permanent-like. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. The community had been less than subtle in their matchmaking efforts. Every social gathering found her and Gideon pushed together. Every conversation seemed to bend toward the future of the valley, and wouldn't it be nice if certain people made certain decisions? After dinner, while Clara read to the children, she caught snippets of conversation from the porch where the men had retreated. She's good for you, Gid. Sam's voice carried, haven't seen you this alive in all the years you've been here. It's not that simple. Gideon replied, Sure it is. You care for her, she cares for you. Both of you too stubborn to say it plain. What's complicated about that? Clara tried to focus on Alice falling down the rabbit hole, but her mind wandered. Was it that simple? In Philadelphia, courtship had been a formal dance of calling cards and chaperoned visits. Here, it was shared work and quiet evenings, building trust through actions rather than words. Miss Whitmore? Thomas interrupted her thoughts. Why does Alice follow the white rabbit? Seems dangerous. Sometimes, Clara said carefully. We have to follow unexpected paths to find where we truly belong. After the reading, as children scattered to chores, Martha cornered Clara in the kitchen. I'm not one to meddle, she began. Which Clara had learned meant she absolutely was. But that man out there is wearing a groove in my porch planks with his pacing. Martha, just listen. I've known Gideon Cole 5 years. Never seen him look at anything the way he looks at you. Like your water, and he's been thirsting his whole life. Martha's expression softened. I know it's not conventional. What he proposed that first night, but nothing out here is conventional. We make our own rules, our own respectability. It's not about respectability, Clara admitted, surprising herself. It's about I came here to be independent, to build my own life. What if I'm just trading one set of expectations for another? Martha dried a dish thoughtfully. My Sam. He proposed by saying he needed a partner to build something bigger than himself. Not a servant, not an ornament, a partner. 15 years later, we've built this. She gestured around the warm kitchen, toward the sounds of family life. I still teach my children, keep the books, make decisions. Partnership doesn't mean losing yourself. With the right man, it means finding more of yourself. Outside, the men's voices grew louder. Through the window, Clara saw more riders approaching, the Millers and what looked like new faces. Sunday dinner at the Hartwells had become an informal community gathering. Clara! Recognition dawned as she saw one of the riders. It was Susan Miller, but with her was a young woman Clara's age, fashionably dressed despite the frontier setting. This is my cousin, Rebecca Stewart. Susan announced. Just arrived from Cincinnati. Rebecca, this is our teacher, Miss Whitmore, and Mr. Cole. Rebecca's eyes swept over Gideon with obvious interest. My, they certainly grow them large out here. She extended a gloved hand, which Gideon took briefly, politely, before stepping back. Throughout the afternoon, Clara watched Rebecca work her charms. She was everything Clara had been trained to be in Philadelphia. Accomplished, flirtatious, skilled in the art of capturing male attention. She played piano prettily, sang with a trained voice, and somehow managed to need Gideon's assistance with every small task. Such a strong man, Rebecca cooed as Gideon helped her down from a fence she'd had no business climbing. I do so admire capability. Tell me, Mr. Cole, is it true you've tamed this whole valley single-handedly? Clara turned away, busying herself with the children, but Martha's knowing look said she wasn't fooling anyone. When it came time to leave, Rebecca managed to position herself for Gideon's help mounting her horse. I do hope we'll see more of each other. Mr. Cole, she said breathlessly. I'm sure frontier life has so much to teach me. The ride back to Gideon's cabin was silent. Clara kept her mare to a steady pace, very aware of Gideon riding beside her, equally quiet. Finally, as they approached the cabin, he spoke. You're angry. I'm not angry. Clara, just her name, but weighted with knowledge. She reined in her mare, turning to face him. Fine, yes, I'm angry, which is ridiculous because I have no claim on you, no right to be angry. You're free to be charmed by whoever you wish. I wasn't charmed. She's beautiful, accomplished, everything a man could want. Gideon dismounted, coming to help her down. His hands lingered on her waist. She's empty. Pretty package with nothing inside but expectations and entitlement. Reminded me why I left civilization in the first place. She wants you. She wants what she sees. The mysterious frontiersman. The challenge. Soon as she realized the reality of life out here, she'd be on the first train back east. He stepped closer. Besides, I already made my offer. It stands until you accept or refuse it. I'm not the kind of man who makes such offers lightly or often. Clara's heart pounded. Gideon. No. He placed a finger gently against her lips. Not yet. Not because you're jealous of some silly girl. When you answer, I want it to be because you've decided what you want, not what you don't want. He was right, and she knew it. But as they tended the horses and prepared the evening meal, Clara felt something had shifted. Rebecca's arrival had clarified things, thrown into sharp relief what Clara stood to lose if she kept hesitating. That night, she lay awake in the cabin's loft. Gideon had insisted on giving her the bed once she'd started staying weekends, listening to him move about below. She thought of the valley, of the children who needed teaching, of the house that could be built. Most of all, she thought of the man who played violin in the evenings and quoted poetry while mending harnesses, who treated her as an equal and looked at her like she was, as Martha said, water in the desert. Tomorrow she would return to town, to her small room above the mercantile and her growing school. But something had to change. The careful dance they'd been doing was no longer enough. Rebecca Stewart's arrival had shown her that clearly. Spring was here, bringing new growth and new possibilities. It was time to decide what she wanted to plant in this fertile ground. What kind of future she wanted to build. The answer, she realized, had been growing in her heart all winter, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Soon, she promised herself. Very soon. She would give Gideon Cole his answer. The morning Clara found the medal, she wasn't looking for secrets. She'd been organizing Gideon's bookshelf while he was out checking cattle, trying to create space for some teaching materials she'd brought from town. A leather journal had fallen from behind the volumes, and when she picked it up, the medal tumbled out, a tarnished piece of metal with a ribbon so faded she couldn't tell its original color. She recognized it as a military commendation, though the details were worn. Setting it carefully aside, she couldn't help but notice the papers that had fallen with it. On top was an old wanted poster, the ink faded but still readable. Wanted, Gideon Big Jake Cole, member of the Black Ridge Gang, armed robbery, $500 reward. Clara's hands trembled as she held the poster. The sketch was crude but unmistakable. The same strong jaw, the same intense eyes, though younger and harder. She sank into the chair, her mind racing. The man who read her Shakespeare, who carved toy horses for children, who treated her with such careful respect, he'd been an outlaw. The door opened and Gideon entered, stopping short when he saw what she held. His face went pale, then resigned. "I wondered when you'd find that," he said quietly. "Is it true?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "May I sit? It's a long story." Clara nodded, still clutching the poster. Gideon took the chair across from her, his usual grace replaced by heavy weariness. "The medal came first," he began. "Battle of Antietam. Saved my captain's life," they said, though I barely remember it. Just smoke and noise and trying to keep breathing. He stared at his hands. "War ended. I went home to find nothing left. Parents dead. Farm sold for taxes. Girl I'd been sweet on married to a shopkeeper. 22 years old and already felt ancient." Clara remained silent, letting him speak. Drifted west like thousands of others. Fell in with bad company in Kansas. The Black Ridge boys. They called themselves, started small, cattle rustling, stage holdups. Nobody heard at first. Just money taken from folks who seemed to have plenty. His jaw tightened. Then Jake Blackridge decided to rob a bank in Topeka. Said it would be easy, just like the others. But there was a guard nobody expected, and Jake shot him. Man had 3 children. You were there? I was lookout. Didn't pull the trigger, but might as well have. We scattered after that, lawmen on our trail. I kept riding north, slept rough, worked when I could find it. The wanted posters followed for a while, then stopped. Guess they figured I died or disappeared into Mexico like the others. Gideon stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Came through this valley 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. Old man named Henderson was selling out, heading back east. I had just enough saved to buy the land, gave him my real name. Figured if the law came, at least I'd face it on my own ground. But they never came. No. Turns out Big Jake Cole died in a saloon fight in Texas, according to the stories, since I'd never been photographed and that sketch could be half the men in the territories. People assumed he was me. The real Gideon Cole became just another homesteader trying to make good. Clara looked at the poster again, then deliberately folded it and set it aside. You could have kept running. Why stay here? Because running wasn't living. Because I wanted to build something instead of tearing things down. Because, he turned to face her, because I hoped someday I might have something worth protecting again. The Hartwells, the Millers, do they know? Sam Hartwell might suspect. He's never asked, and I've never told. Out here, folks judge a man by what he does, not what he did. Clara stood, moving to stand before him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Pain flickered across his features. How do you tell the woman you're falling in love with that you're wanted for robbery? That you've done things that would horrify her? I kept waiting for the right moment, but it never came. Then you were here, part of my life, and I couldn't bear to lose you. So you let me find out like this instead. I'm sorry." His shoulders slumped. "I'll understand if you need to leave. I'll take you to town, help you find other lodgings. You shouldn't be associated with—" "Stop." Clara placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "I need to think. She stepped back. "I'm going for a walk." She left him standing there and strode out into the spring afternoon. Her mind churned as she walked along the creek, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the outlaw he'd been. She thought of her father, stealing to save her mother, dying from the shame of it. She thought of choices made in desperation, of second chances and redemption. An hour later, she found herself at the spot where Gideon envisioned building their house. Their house. She realized, not just his. She'd been thinking of it that way for weeks now. Could she give that up? Could she walk away from the children who needed teaching, the community that had embraced her, the man who'd shown her a different kind of life? But could she stay with someone who'd hidden such an enormous truth? When she returned to the cabin, Gideon was sitting on the porch, the medal in his hands. "My mother would have been ashamed," he said without looking up. "She raised me to know right from wrong. I failed her." Clara sat beside him, maintaining distance between them. "Tell me about after these 5 years. Tell me who you've been." So he did. He told her about every family he'd helped, every barn he'd assisted in raising, every dispute he'd mediated with fair-minded wisdom. He spoke of winters when he'd shared his stored food with struggling neighbors, of the time he'd risked his life to save the Miller children from a flash flood. "I can't undo what I did," he finished. "Can't bring back that guard or return what was stolen. All I can do is live better, be better, try to balance the scales somehow." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "In Philadelphia, they would say you're irredeemable. That criminal behavior indicates a permanent flaw in character." They might be right. "They're not." She turned to face him. "I've watched you these months, Gideon. I've seen who you are when you think no one's looking. You're gentle with animals, patient with children, generous with the neighbors. You work harder than any man I know and ask for nothing in return. Clara, I'm not finished. You hid this from me, and that hurts. Trust it's everything out here. But I understand why you did it, and I need you to understand something." She took a breath. "That man on the wanted poster? He's dead. He died the day you decided to stop running and start building. The man I know is Gideon Cole, rancher and neighbor, and the man I love." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "What did you say?" "I love you." The words came easier the second time. "I've been falling in love with you since that first night when you could have taken advantage of a desperate woman but chose to be honorable instead. And if you think I'm going to let some faded wanted poster drive me away now, you don't know me as well as you should." Clara. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "I don't deserve— None of us deserve grace. That's why it's called grace." She moved closer. "But I have conditions? Anything. No more secrets. Ever. If there's anything else in your past, tell me now. There's nothing. You know the worst. And if the law ever does come," his jaw set, "then I'll face it. I won't run. Won't let you be tarred by association. I'll take responsibility for what I did." Clara studied his face, seeing the truth there. "All right, then. All right. You asked me to warm your bed and let you build me a ranch. I'm saying yes, Gideon, to all of it. To you, with your past and your guilt and your dreams of redemption. To this land and this life, to being your partner in whatever comes." He stared at her as if afraid to believe. "Even knowing what I was? Because I know who you are." She took his hand, linking their fingers. "We both came here running from different kinds of shame. Maybe that makes us right for each other. Maybe it means we understand second chances better than most." Gideon pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she might disappear. Clara felt the tremor that ran through him, the release of a fear he'd carried for months. When he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were wet. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this," he said. "Don't try to be worthy, just be you. The man who reads poetry and makes toys and plays violin. That's who I want." As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they sat together on the porch planning their future. There would be challenges ahead, building a house, establishing a school, creating a life together, and always, the shadow of the past would linger. The possibility that someday someone might connect Gideon Cole the rancher with Big Jake the outlaw. But Clara had made her choice with eyes wide open. In this land of second chances, where people carve new lives from raw earth and sheer will, she would stand beside this complicated, honorable man who'd chosen redemption over running. Together, they would build something worth protecting, worth fighting for. The wanted poster still lay on the table inside, a reminder of choices made and prices paid. Tomorrow, Clara would burn it. The past could not be erased, but it didn't have to define the future. Not here, not for them. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Gideon played his violin while Clara leaned against his shoulder. The melody was new, hopeful, speaking of beginnings rather than endings. It drifted across the valley like a promise, like a prayer, like the first note of a love song that would play for years to come. The man from Philadelphia arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, driving a polished carriage that looked absurdly out of place on the dusty main street of Willow Creek. Clara saw him through the schoolhouse window, immaculate gray suit, gold watch chain glinting in the sun, an air of Eastern superiority that made her stomach tighten with recognition. "Children, continue with your reading," she instructed, though her voice betrayed her tension. "Sarah, please help the younger ones with their words." She stepped onto the schoolhouse porch as the man approached, knowing before he spoke who had sent him. Richard Thornberry didn't do anything by half measures. "Miss Whitmore." The man tipped his hat with practiced politeness. "My name is Harrison Wells. I represent Mr. Richard Thornberry of Philadelphia. He has sent me to discuss your situation." "My situation is none of Mr. Thornberry's concern." Clara kept her voice level, aware that curious faces were pressed against the schoolhouse windows. "On the contrary." Wells produced an envelope from his coat. "Mr. Thornberry remains most concerned about your welfare. He has authorized me to make you a generous offer." Clara didn't take the envelope. "I'm not interested in Mr. Thornberry's offers." $5,000, Wells continued smoothly. "Enough to return to Philadelphia in comfort, re-establish yourself properly. All Mr. Thornberry asks is that you reconsider his proposal of marriage." The answer remains no. Wells's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Miss Whitmore, surely you must see the limitations of your current circumstances. Teaching farm children in a frontier schoolhouse, living in accommodations that I'm told are barely suitable for servants. Mr. Thornberry offers you a life of refinement, social position. Mr. Wells." Clara's interruption was sharp. "I have a class to teach. Good day." But Wells wasn't finished. "I'm staying at the hotel for several days. Mr. Thornberry was quite insistent that I not return without a favorable response. He also mentioned that he's been in communication with the school board in Philadelphia regarding certain irregularities in your father's accounts that were never fully investigated." Clara went cold. "That matter was settled." "Was it? Records can be re-examined, new questions raised. Your father's reputation, and by extension, yours, could face renewed scrutiny. Unless, of course, you were safely married to a respectable man willing to put such questions to rest. Are you threatening me, Mr. Wells?" "I'm simply explaining realities. Miss Whitmore, I'll call again tomorrow. Perhaps after reflection, you'll see the wisdom of Mr. Thornberry's continued interest." Clara watched him walk away, her hands shaking with anger. She turned to find Sarah Hartwell in the doorway, eyes wide with concern. "Miss Whitmore, are you all right?" "Yes, dear." Clara forced a smile. "Just a visitor from back east. Nothing important." But it was important. And by evening, word had spread through the small community. Clara wasn't surprised when Gideon appeared at her boarding house room just after dark. "Heard you had a visitor," he said without preamble. "News travels fast." She let him in, grateful for his presence. "A representative of Mr. Thornberry, the man I refused in Philadelphia." Gideon's expression darkened as she relayed the conversation. When she reached the part about threats to her father's reputation, his fists clenched. "He's trying to force you back." "Yes." Clara sank into a chair. "And he might succeed if he raises questions about my father again, makes public accusations. The scandal would follow me even here. The school board might feel obligated to dismiss me." "Over something your father did? Something that's already been settled?" "You know how these things work. Gideon, reputation is everything, especially for a woman, especially for a teacher." She met his eyes. "Just as your past could destroy what you've built here." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell Richard Thornberry to go to blazes," she said fiercely. "But I can't risk the school, the children. Maybe I should—" "No." His grip tightened. "You're not going back to him. We'll find another way." The next morning, Clara arrived at school to find a small crowd gathered outside. The Hartwells were there, the Millers, even some families from outlying farms. Sam Hartwell stepped forward as she approached. "Morning, Miss Whitmore. Heard you might be having some trouble with a visitor from back east." Yes, Mr. Thornberry has sent someone to convince me to return to Philadelphia." "And you don't want to go?" This from Martha Hartwell. "No, my life is here now." Sam nodded. "Then it's settled. We'll have a word with this Mr. Wells." "Oh, you don't have to—" "Miss Whitmore." "Mrs." Miller interrupted. "You've taught our Amy to read when we thought she never would. You've given our children opportunities we never dreamed of. You think we're going to let some city man drive you off?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "He's threatened to bring up old scandals about my father. It could damage my reputation, make me unsuitable." "Unsuitable," Martha snorted. "You've birthed calves, survived blizzards, and taught algebra to farm boys. You're suitable for anything this territory can throw at you." That afternoon, Harrison Wells returned to the schoolhouse to find not just Clara, but what seemed like half the town waiting for him. Gideon stood by the door, arms crossed, his presence a silent threat. The mothers formed a protective semicircle around Clara, while the fathers lounged with studied casualness that didn't quite hide their readiness for trouble. "Miss Whitmore," Wells began, clearly disconcerted by the audience. "I had hoped to speak with you privately. These are my neighbors. Mr. Wells, my community. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of them." Wells's jaw tightened. "Very well. Have you reconsidered Mr. Thornberry's generous offer?" "No." "Then I'm afraid I must inform you that Mr. Thornberry will be forced to share certain information with relevant authorities." "About her father taking money to save his dying wife?" Sam Hartwell interrupted. "We know about that. Tragic situation. Man did what he had to do for love." Wells blinked. "You? No?" "Miss Whitmore told us weeks ago." Martha added, "We don't hold children accountable for their parents' actions out here. Mr. Wells, we judge people by their own deeds. But her reputation is sterling." "Mrs." Miller said firmly. "Anyone who says otherwise will answer to us." Wells looked around the room, clearly reassessing. His gaze lingered on Gideon, who hadn't moved or spoken, but whose presence filled the doorway like a storm cloud. "And who might you be, sir?" Wells asked. "Gideon Cole, Miss Whitmore's intended—" Clara's breath caught. They hadn't discussed making their engagement public yet. Wells's eyes narrowed. "I see. And what exactly do you do? Mr. Cole?" "I raise cattle, build things, protect what's mine. Mr. Thornberry is a man of considerable influence. So am I." Gideon cut him off. "In ways that matter out here. Your Mr. Thornberry can spread all the gossip he wants in Philadelphia, won't change anything in Willow Creek." Wells straightened his coat, trying to regain his composure. Miss Whitmore, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This arrangement cannot possibly offer you the security and position that marriage to Mr. Thornberry would provide. Clara stood, drawing strength from the community around her. Mr. Wells, please convey to Mr. Thornberry that I am exactly where I wish to be, with people who value me for who I am, not what social advantage I might bring. I will not be returning to Philadelphia. I will not be marrying him, and I will not be intimidated by threats to my reputation. Furthermore, Gideon added, his voice dangerously quiet, if Mr. Thornberry continues to harass Miss Whitmore, I'll be taking the train to Philadelphia myself. I suspect a man of his considerable influence wouldn't appreciate the kind of direct conversation I'd have in mind. Wells paled at the implicit threat. He looked around the room one more time, seeing no sympathy in any face, then turned on his heel. I'll convey your message, Miss Whitmore. Good day. After he left, the schoolhouse erupted in chatter and congratulations. Clara found herself embraced by woman after woman, while the men clapped Gideon on the back. Through it all, she kept meeting his eyes, seeing the question there. Had he overstepped by declaring their engagement publicly? When the crowd finally dispersed, leaving them alone, Clara approached him. Intended? Should have asked first, he admitted. But seeing that pompous fool trying to take you away, I couldn't stand it. Gideon Cole, she said softly. Are you officially proposing? He dropped to one knee right there in the schoolhouse, pulling out a simple gold ring. Been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me in that valley? Teach our children and our neighbors' children. Make this place a real home. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, to all of it. He slipped the ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her as the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows. When they finally broke apart, Clara laughed shakily. Richard Thornberry is going to be furious. Let him be. He can't touch us here. Gideon cupped her face gently. This is your home now. Our home. And everyone here knows it. That evening, the Hartwells hosted an impromptu engagement party. As Clara watched Gideon dance with little Sarah, saw the acceptance and joy in her neighbors' faces, she realized that Richard Thornberry had actually done her a favor. His threats had forced her to publicly choose this life, this man, this community. There was no going back now, and she wouldn't want to even if she could. Wells left town the next morning on the first stage, looking considerably less polished than when he'd arrived. Within a week, Clara received a terse letter from Thornberry acknowledging her decision and promising no further contact. The threat to her reputation vanished like smoke, unable to take hold in a place where people measured worth differently than in Philadelphia's drawing rooms. As spring turned toward summer, Clara continued teaching while she and Gideon planned their future. The house in the valley began to take shape in detailed sketches, the school beside it growing from dream to certainty. The community that had rallied to protect her now threw itself into helping them build, recognizing that their marriage would anchor both of them permanently to Willow Creek. The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after dawn, too large to be travelers, too fast to be a cattle drive. Clara stood on the porch of their half-finished house, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Gideon emerged from the barn, rifle already in hand, his expression grim. Get to the Hartwells, he said quietly. Take the children. Clara had been teaching the Miller and Hartwell children at the new schoolhouse site when she'd spotted the riders. I'm not leaving you. Clara. No. She moved to stand beside him. Whatever this is, we face it together. The riders came into focus, 6 men, hard-faced and travel-worn, led by a man whose presence seemed to darken the air around him. Clara heard Gideon's sharp intake of breath. Jake Blackridge, he murmured. Should have known he'd find me eventually. The riders reined in 20 yards from the house. Jake Blackridge leaned forward in his saddle, a cold smile playing on his scarred face. He was older than Clara had imagined, with gray threading through his black beard and eyes like chips of flint. Well, Big Jake Cole, or should I say Gideon, heard you'd gone respectable. His gaze swept over Clara, the partially built house, the planted fields. Quite the setup you've got here. What do you want, Blackridge? What's mine? The outlaw's voice hardened. You left us high and dry in Topeka. Boy, rode off with your share of the take while we dealt with the law. That debt's been accumulating interest. I didn't take anything from Topeka. I left because you killed that guard. Details. Blackridge waved dismissively. Point is, you owe me 5 years of successful operations here. From what I hear, cattle, land. Even got yourself a pretty schoolmarm. Time to share the wealth with your old partners. I'm not your partner. Haven't been for 5 years. Once Blackridge gang. Always Blackridge gang. The outlaw's hand moved to his gun. Unless you're dead, of course. That can be arranged. Clara stepped forward before Gideon could stop her. Mr. Blackridge, I'm Clara Whitmore, soon to be Clara Cole. Whatever debt you think exists, we can discuss it civilly. Blackridge laughed. An ugly sound. Civilly? Lady, you don't discuss things civilly with men like me. Your man knows that. Don't you, Gideon? Let her go, Gideon said. This is between us. Nothing's just between us anymore. You made sure of that when you settled down. Started playing farmer. Blackridge's eyes glittered dangerously. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to gather up all the money you've got hidden away. Then you're going to sign over the deed to this land. Payment for services rendered and partnerships broken. No. Blackridge drew his gun with practiced ease. Maybe you need motivation. The shot rang out before Clara could react, kicking up dirt at her feet. She froze as Gideon stepped in front of her, his own rifle raised. Next one goes in her. Blackridge said conversationally, Unless you want to be reasonable, you won't get away with this. Clara found her voice. The community. What community? One of the other outlaws spoke up. We cut the telegraph lines. Watched the town yesterday. Marshal's gone to the county seat. Won't be back for days. Just farmers and shopkeepers left. They won't risk their lives for one man's past catching up. But he was wrong. Even as he spoke, Clara saw movement on the ridgeline. Riders approaching fast, Sam Hartwell in the lead, followed by Tom Miller and others. Word had spread somehow. The children must have run for help when they saw the strangers. Blackridge noticed too. His face darkened. Friends of yours? Neighbors? Gideon said. Good people who won't stand for murder. Murder? I'm just collecting a debt. But Blackridge's confidence wavered as more riders appeared. Clara counted at least a dozen men, all armed, forming a wide circle around the outlaws. Sam Hartwell rode forward, shotgun across his saddle. Morning, Gideon, Miss Clara. These gentlemen causing trouble? Just a business discussion, Blackridge said, but his men were getting nervous, hands twitching toward weapons as they found themselves outnumbered. Funny kind of business that needs guns. Tom Miller observed. Maybe you fellows should move along. This ain't your concern. Farmer. See, that's where you're wrong. Sam's voice hardened. Gideon Cole's our neighbor. Miss Clara's our teacher. That makes it our concern. Blackridge's laugh was bitter. You have any idea who you're protecting? What he's done? Don't much care. Sam replied. Know who he is now. That's what matters. The standoff stretched taut. 6 outlaws facing down an ever-growing group of farmers and ranchers. Clara could feel the violence hovering, waiting for one wrong move to set it off. Then she heard something that chilled her blood. More horses approaching from the opposite direction. Boss! One of Blackridge's men pointed. Reinforcements. But as the new riders crested the hill, Clara's heart sank. These weren't townspeople. 3 more hard-faced men wearing the same trail-worn look as Blackridge's gang. Thought you might need help. Jake, the lead rider called. Saw the telegraph lines down. Figured you'd found him. Now the numbers were more even. Blackridge's confidence returned. Last chance, Gideon, the money and the deed, or we paint this pretty valley red. If you want to fight, Gideon said quietly, I'll give you one. But not here, not with innocents in the line of fire. You and me, Jake, like it should have been in Topeka. Gideon, no, Clara whispered, but Blackridge was already nodding. You always did have a sense of the dramatic. Fine, you and me. You win, we ride away. I win, I take everything. And if we both lose, then our friends sort it out after. Blackridge dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. Been waiting 5 years for this. The crowd formed a rough circle as the two men faced each other. Clara wanted to scream, to stop this madness, but Martha Hartwell's hand on her arm held her back. Let them settle it, the older woman murmured. Some things have to end where they started. Gideon set aside his rifle, unbuckled his gun belt. This wouldn't be a gunfight, but something older, more primitive. Two men settling their past with fists and will. They circled each other warily. Despite the size difference, Gideon towering over the older man, Blackridge moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd survived countless fights. Could have been rich, Blackridge said as they closed. Could have owned half of Kansas by now. Could have been a lot of things. Gideon dodged a swift punch. Chose to be better. They clashed with brutal force. Blackridge was fast, experienced, fighting dirty with kicks and elbows. But Gideon had reach and strength, and something more. He was fighting for a future, not just settling a past. The fight ranged across the dusty ground, neither man giving quarter. Clara winced as Blackridge's fist connected with Gideon's jaw, sending him staggering. But Gideon recovered, caught the older man's next punch, and delivered a crushing blow to his ribs. They grappled, fell, rolled in the dirt. Blackridge pulled a hidden knife, the blade flashing in the sun. Clara's scream died in her throat as Gideon caught the man's wrist, fighting for control of the weapon. Then, suddenly, it was over. The knife twisted away. Blackridge on his back with Gideon's massive hands around his throat. The outlaw's face purpled as he clawed at the grip. Do it, Blackridge wheezed. Finish what you started in Topeka. Gideon hesitated. Around them, men on both sides tensed, hands moving to weapons. This was the moment of decision. Kill Blackridge and potentially start a bloodbath, or let him live and risk him coming back. Gideon, Clara's voice cut through the tension. You're not that man anymore. He looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. Slowly, he released Blackridge's throat and stood, stepping back. The outlaw lay gasping, defeated but alive. Get out, Gideon said quietly. Don't come back. Whatever debt existed between us died today. Blackridge struggled to his feet, hatred burning in his eyes. For a moment, Clara thought he'd go for his gun anyway. Then one of his men spoke up, the younger one who'd announced the reinforcements. It's over. Jake, he won. Fair and square. Fair, Blackridge spat blood. Nothing fair about... The unmistakable sound of a rifle cocking cut him off. Sarah Hartwell, all of 12 years old, stood with her father's hunting rifle trained steadily on the outlaw leader. My teacher said you should go, she said clearly. I think you should listen. The absurdity of it, a child holding armed outlaws at bay, broke the tension. Even some of Blackridge's men cracked reluctant smiles. The fight was over. The drama played out. Time to ride on. This isn't finished. Blackridge growled as his men helped him to his horse, but the threat rang hollow. He'd been beaten in front of witnesses, his mystique shattered. The Blackridge gang would follow him out of habit, but his days of inspiring fear were ending. They rode away slowly, watched by the assembled community until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did Clara run to Gideon, checking his injuries, split lip, bruised ribs, knuckles torn and bleeding. You fool, she said, tears streaming. You beautiful, noble fool. Had to end it, he said, pulling her close. Couldn't build a future with that shadow hanging over us. Sam Hartwell approached, hand extended. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Maybe both. He grinned as Gideon shook his hand. But it's done now. You faced your past in front of everyone. No more secrets. No more looking over your shoulder. The crowd dispersed slowly. Men clapping Gideon's shoulder. Women fussing over his injuries. Sarah Hartwell refused to give up the rifle until her mother pried it from her hands, earning a gentle scolding and a fierce hug. That evening, as Clara tended Gideon's wounds in their unfinished house, he caught her hand. You stayed. Even when the guns came out, you stayed. Where else would I go? She kissed his bruised knuckles. This is my home. You're my home. Blackridge might come back. Men like him don't forget easily. Then we'll face him again, together, with our neighbors, our friends. She smiled through her tears. That's what community means. Gideon, standing together when trouble comes. Outside, the sun set over their valley, painting the sky crimson and gold. The frame of their future house stood silhouetted against the light, walls yet to be completed, rooms yet to be filled with life and laughter. But the foundation was solid, built on truth and trust and the courage to face whatever came. The past had ridden into their valley with guns and threats. It had ridden out defeated, not by violence, but by the simple power of people choosing to stand together. Tomorrow they would continue building, the house, the school, the life they'd imagined. But tonight, they held each other and knew they'd already built something that no outlaw could steal, a place where they belonged. The valley had never looked more beautiful than on Clara and Gideon's wedding day. October painted the cottonwoods gold along the creek, and the new schoolhouse stood proud on its rise, its bell tower catching the morning sun. The building had been finished just a week before, a community effort that saw every family contributing labor, materials, or both. Clara stood before the mirror in the Hartwell home, Martha fussing with a simple white dress they'd sewn together. It wasn't the elaborate gown she might have worn in Philadelphia, but it was perfect for here. Practical cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Something she could wear again for special occasions. You're radiant, Martha declared. Stepping back, that man won't know what hit him. He's seen me birth calves and chase runaway horses. Clara laughed. I think he knows exactly what he's getting. That's the beauty of it. Susan Miller added, pinning the last wildflower into Clara's hair. He's marrying you, not some idealized version. The ceremony would be held outdoors, between the schoolhouse and the creek. Reverend Thompson had ridden in from the county seat, and it seemed the entire valley had turned out. Even some faces Clara didn't recognize. Word had spread about the teacher who'd stood up to outlaws and the reformed man who'd fought for his future. As Martha's husband escorted her down the makeshift aisle between rows of assembled neighbors, Clara's eyes found Gideon immediately. He stood tall and slightly uncomfortable in his new suit, but his face, when he saw her, that look of wonder and love made her heart skip. Sam Hartwell stood beside him as best man, while little Sarah scattered late wildflowers with solemn determination. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thompson began, his voice carrying across the valley, we gather today to witness something remarkable, not just the union of two souls, but the triumph of hope over past sorrows, of love over loneliness, of community over isolation. Clara barely heard the traditional words, lost in Gideon's steady gaze. When it came time for vows, he surprised her by speaking from memory rather than repeating after the Reverend. Clara, his deep voice was rough with emotion, you knocked on my door in a blizzard and brought spring into my life. You saw past what I'd been to who I could become. I promised to build with you, not just houses and schools, but a life worth living. I promised to stand beside you through whatever storms come, to read poetry by the fire when we're old, and to never stop being grateful you chose to stay. Clara blinked back tears as she made her own vows. Gideon, you offered me shelter and showed me home. You gave me courage to face my past and faith to build a future. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and multiply your joys, to teach our children to be brave and kind, and to warm your bed and your heart for all the days of our lives. A ripple of gentle laughter went through the crowd at her callback to his first bold proposition. Even Reverend Thompson smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration that followed filled the valley with music and laughter. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Every family had brought their best dishes. Tom Miller's fiddle joined with others for dancing that lasted well into the evening. Children ran between the adults, playing games and sneaking extra desserts. As the sun began to set, Gideon found Clara watching the festivities from the schoolhouse steps. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside her. Beyond words. She leaned into his warmth. "Look what we've built already." The scene before them was everything they'd imagined. Community, belonging, purpose. The new school would open officially next week with 32 enrolled students. 3 more families were moving to the valley before winter, drawn by the promise of good land and education for their children. "Dance with your wife, Gideon Cole," Martha Hartwell commanded, appearing before them. "Plenty of time for sitting when you're old." They joined the dancing, Clara laughing as Gideon's careful steps showed he'd been practicing. Around them, their neighbors celebrated not just a wedding, but what it represented: permanence, growth, the future of their valley. As the evening wound down, Sam Hartwell called for attention. "Before you newlyweds disappear, we've got something for you." He gestured to a covered wagon near the schoolhouse. "Community gift. Go on, look." Under the canvas. Clara gasped. The wagon was loaded with lumber, tools, glass windows, and everything else needed to complete their house. Tucked among the supplies were quilts, dishes, preserves, the start of a household given with love. "We figured you'd need help finishing before winter," Sam explained as Clara wiped away tears. "Can't have our teacher freezing." 1 year later, Clara stood in that completed house, looking out the window Gideon had installed with such care. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the baby move within. The valley had transformed even more. 2 new houses visible from her kitchen, the school bell ringing as Sarah Hartwell, now her assistant, dismissed the younger children for lunch. "Sitting down on the job?" Gideon teased, entering with an armload of wood. "Your child is practicing gymnastics." Clara replied, "I'm simply trying to stay upright." He set down the wood and wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands joining hers over their future. "Our child," he corrected softly. "Still can't quite believe it's real." "Which part? The baby? The house? The fact that you're a respected member of the community who serves on the school board?" "All of it." He turned her in his arms. "Mostly you, choosing this life, choosing me. Best choice I ever made." Clara said firmly, "Even if you did proposition me quite scandalously that first night." "Worked, didn't it?" His grin was unrepentant. The baby arrived with the first snow, as if completing a circle from their beginning. Martha Hartwell served as midwife, with half the valley waiting anxiously for news. When Gideon finally emerged from the house, cradling a bundle, cheers erupted. "A daughter," he announced, his voice breaking. Perfect and healthy and already opinionated like her mother. They named her Hope, for everything she represented. 5 years passed in a blur of seasons. The valley filled with families drawn by the school that had become renowned throughout the territory. Clara taught while balancing motherhood, helped by a network of women who traded child care and support. Gideon's ranch prospered, his cattle operation expanding with hired hands who often brought families, adding to the growing community. On a crisp autumn evening, Clara sat grading papers while Gideon worked on another wooden toy. His carvings had become legendary among the valley's children. Hope, now 5, practiced her letters at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration. 2-year-old James played with blocks near the fire, babbling contentedly. "Mama," Hope said suddenly, "tell the story about the storm." "Which storm, sweetheart?" "The one where you knocked on Papa's door." Clara smiled, setting aside her work. It had become family legend, told and retold until even the children who hadn't been born yet knew every detail. "It was the worst blizzard in 20 years, she began, as Gideon looked up from his carving to listen. "I was lost and freezing, certain I would die." She told the story as she always did, but hearing it now, surrounded by the life they'd built. It seemed like something from a fairy tale. The desperate woman and the lonely giant, the bold proposition and the careful trust, the outlaws and the community that stood against them. And then what happened? Hope demanded, though she knew perfectly well. Then your papa kept his promise. He built me a ranch and a school and a life worth living. And I kept mine. I warmed his bed and his heart. And you lived happily ever after, Hope concluded triumphantly. We lived happily, Clara corrected gently. Ever after is still being written. Later, after the children were asleep, Clara and Gideon sat on their porch, watching stars emerge above their valley. The schoolhouse stood silent on its hill, waiting for tomorrow's lessons. Smoke rose from chimneys across the valley, marking homes that hadn't existed when she first arrived. Do you ever think about that night? Gideon asked. How different things might have been. Sometimes, Clara laced her fingers through his. But then I look at all this, our children, our home, our community, and I can't imagine any other path. You warmed my bed, he said softly. But more than that, you warmed my life, made it worth living. And you built me more than a ranch. Clara replied, You built me a whole world. They sat in comfortable silence, no longer the desperate teacher and lonely rancher who'd found each other in a storm, but partners who'd weathered every season together. Inside the house, handmade furniture gleamed with polish, books lined shelves built with care, and wooden toys waited for small hands. The silver pen from Philadelphia sat on Clara's desk next to essays about frontier life written by children who would never know the limitations she'd fled. This was what love looked like after the dramatic beginning. Not constant passion, but steady warmth. Not grand gestures, but daily choices to build together. It was Gideon reading bedtime stories in his rumbling voice. Clara teaching him new songs on the fiddle. Both of them working side by side to create something larger than themselves. The storm that brought them together had been fierce, but brief. The life they'd built in its wake was gentle and enduring, rooted deep in the valley's soil and the community's heart. And as they headed inside to their warm bed in their completed home, Clara knew that sometimes the boldest propositions led to the quietest, strongest loves. In the place where she'd once sought only shelter, she'd found everything: love, purpose, belonging, and the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The frontier had tested her, shaped her, and ultimately given her more than any Philadelphia drawing room ever could have. This was her happily ever after, not an ending, but a continuation, written fresh each day in children's laughter, honest work, and the steady presence of the man who'd once promised to build her a ranch tomorrow. Tomorrow had become today, and today had become a lifetime. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale of Clara and Gideon. Please drop a comment below to let me know what country or state you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of frontier romance, courage, and adventure. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Clara and Gideon's journey touched your heart the most? Share your feelings in the comments below. Until next time, partners.